Just in case someone wants to see how I did this, decided to take a couple quick little clips of the beginning. These are my original T-top shades, and actually, when I got my car, I was the one that opened these from the original packaging. The previous owner had never used them, so it didn't take long for them to detach. Now, unlike the headliner, the foam that's in the middle of this is still fairly good. It's not going to fall right off like the headliner foam did, and I can show you how I managed to get that off later. But you can see the fabric is trashed. So the very first thing you want to do is remove this this reveal here, or edging, or whatever you want to call it. And this entire project is pretty easy. It's just time consuming. So here's the easiest way to not make a huge mess. I like to. This is the top thread, or I guess some people call it the right side, and this is the wrong side. This would also be the needle thread, and this would be the bobbin thread. If you're familiar with sewing machines, which you're going to have to for this project. So what I like to do is get this started, and then if you pull, you'll see that lower thread will pop up. And then all you have to do, and I usually use a thread, a seam ripper to grab that easier, but you just pull that, come on focus, pull that out, and then you can grab this and just pull it down, and then pull it up again. And grab it, pull it out, and you can actually usually pull this and get the next loop. Focus. See how I got the next loop there. Try not to do that too much because I don't want it to blow the holes out of the cardboard, but that is how you unthread that, or easy way to get that out. You can cut the threads too, but in my opinion it just makes a mess. And I don't know, this just, when you get in the groove of this, I'm just sitting out on my porch right now and kind of getting the groove of it. It goes quick and doesn't make too much of a mess. I've got, you know, all the way around here done, all the way at the start, all the way around. So I'm going to finish that, and then I'm going to clean the foam off, and then I will, I'm not, probably not going to take much video on gluing fabric down. You guys seen me do that. It's really simple. Just glue it down and cut it, and then I will show you how I sewed it back on. Here we are in the old dungeon basement. I just got done peeling the material off and cleaning off the foam. The thing that I found that works best to get this stuff off, and you can still see there's a teeny tiny little bit of residue, but it doesn't matter. The thing that you can see it's messy. I actually put it in a bag, and you see some of that crap in there. I put it in a bag and try to keep some of the mess. But I have one of these multi-tools, and I have a paint scraper. And I found that I put a slight bend to it, and as long as you're careful, you won't dig the cardboard up. You'll see I did dig the cardboard up a little bit here, and if you're not careful on the edges, you'll shave some off. But this cardboard's pretty thick, and even with a few nicks in it, it's okay, because what I use to get the surface really clean is 80 or 100 grit sandpaper on that multi-tool, cranked way up, the speed cranked way up, and it actually gets it pretty nice. And what it'll do is it'll feather those edges. Focus. Alright, it might be time for a real camera for these videos. It'll feather the edges so that it's not a big deal when you cover it. So I'm going to go ahead and throw some glue on this. Got my fabric cleaned up there, or cut out. You can see my son's birthday present I'm working on. I got him an old Power Wheels Jeep. The thing is so cool. Tearing it apart and just putting new hardware, because it's all, rusty from sitting outside, and cleaning it up for him. He's going to go nuts. Maybe do an 18-volt upgrade on it for him. Anyway, I'm going to spray this with glue, throw the fabric on there, let it dry, and then I trim it with a razor. One of these deals, just real sharp, go around the edge, clean, get a real nice clean cut, and once that's done, we'll go upstairs and we'll sew it. I'm not going to record me gluing or anything. It's really straightforward. Just leave yourself an inch or two around the border. Do it nice and smooth. This one isn't really flat. I don't know if it got wet, but if it was flat, you could put the material good side down and then just lay this down on a flat surface and it might work, but I'll probably just roll and smooth on this one like I did before. So that's that. I will pick this up when I'm putting that trim strip back on. Now comes the fun part. We've got to get this strip that goes around the edge back on and get it sewn. There's probably a bunch of different ways to do it, but this is how I'm doing it. I almost didn't do it. I almost just left the raw edge of the material because I didn't think that our sewing machine would go through cardboard, but it actually goes through no problem. The only catch to it is I don't run it with the foot pedal. I do it by hand. I'll show you that in a minute. But anyways, the way I decided to keep this lined up, because you can't see one side of it as you're sewing, so I wanted to make sure that on this back side, which will be down, that the strip remained in place. And what I ended up using was this 2mm double-sided 3M that I got for another project. I have a whole bunch of it left, so I didn't mind wasting some of it. All I did was run it around, and it actually is it's only 2 mil, so it goes between the edge and the holes, so it doesn't interfere with your needle, and you can curve it because it's thin. So what I do is I just peel it back, and then I make sure I stick. This stuff is like, you know, it's from 1986, so it's pretty much stuck to that U shape. Just make sure I stick the edge up against the edge of the cardboard and then press it down. And then the other thing I do is I run a couple needles, a couple of pins every few inches, and all that does is keeps my hole spacing. If I make sure this goes through a hole, chances are this one will be lined up, so on and so forth. And by the time I get back around here, I will be lined up. The whole idea is that I try to hit as many holes as I can with the sewing machine. Most of these are evenly spaced, and I can set the spacing, but even the factory seam job has some uneven stitching, so you can't expect to hit it every time. But I'm going to finish getting the strip lined up, and then I will show you how I was sewing it. For sewing, all you really need is, I picked up heavy thread, and I think it's the color is called slate. It's not on here, but I think it was called slate. It's pretty close. You won't be able to tell once it's on there, but we will see how this comes out. So this is the setup for actually sewing the strip back on. I found it best to find something to block up your sunshade so that you don't have to hold it up. You really are only sewing onto a couple millimeters of the edge of that old cardboard, so you don't want it just hanging. It'll probably rip. Now, I'm having a little bit of trouble with this thread that I'm using. The other thread that I used the first time, I actually already did one of these. This is the stuff I used the last time. See how shiny it is? It's more of like a meant for like knitting or something, but when I saw it on the shelf, it looked like it was nice and thick. It's not. But the sewing machine doesn't like this thick thread, so I'm getting an odd result here. However, it's working, and it's enough for me to show you how to do it. So I got my strip plotted out all the way around, and I have pins kind of stuck in there to keep it in place. And I've already started to sew the seam on there, so you can see that see how it works there. I leave a little bit of this folded over because this will actually overlap a couple inches onto that seam. Now, the reason I say that I'm not doing this with the pedal, when I use the pedal, because it's going through cardboard, it tends to as the needle's getting pulled up, it kind of tends to make this hop a little bit. After a few strikes, it messes with the foot that pulls it through, and it just doesn't seem like it sews as well, and it kind of causes a little bit of an issue. So I'm turning it by hand. You see I have one of my son's Band-Aids on because the last time I did this, I got a huge blister from the amount of turning. Um, but it works. It doesn't take too long once you get into the groove, but essentially you just kind of get in here and you pull it tight so that it's tight against the edge, and you just kind of hold it like that and start running it. And I'll set it up on the tripod here and try to get a shot of how to do that. And you go all the way around. You really need a sewing machine for this. If you were to try to hand sew this, maybe you could do it. It would take you ages. It would, at that point, really just be worth spending the $50 for a reproduction set of these things. I think they're like $50. I happen to have a sewing machine, so I actually we got this, and my wife hates it. She gets really mad because I am able to get better results on certain things, and she gets frustrated. But really, it's a really good tool for this, for doing some auto stuff. I mean, I did shifter boots and e-brake boots in my Subaru, and a couple other odds and ends, so it comes in handy. But let me try to get a shot of doing this. I'll show you running a few inches of stitch, and then that should be enough. It's basic sewing. Go on Google, learn how to go around corners. Basically you run it to the very corner, leave the needle in there, spin it, and then continue your run. It's just like sewing anything else. You just got to kind of make sure the material's tucked in and make sure this is pulled over so it's tight against the edge. So it's not too bad. So you just turn it. Try not to put too much pressure on this, because if you bear down on it, it will keep the foot from pulling it through. The other thing is there's guides here on the bobbin plate, and you can kind of pick a line, and you really, if you've got your strip laid out nicely, your thread should be a fairly consistent distance away from the edge, so you can kind of find one of those lines and use it as a guide, because staring at where the needle goes in sometimes it's too late. You're already going crooked, so it's best if you look at the one of the guidelines here. So you can see it's pretty easy. You just run it through. If something happens, if you get halfway through this and the thread snaps or something goes cattywampus with the pattern, or if it just doesn't, you get like a weird zigzag or something happens, you don't have to panic. You can stop, clear the thread out, rethread the machine, and make sure you stick your needle back down through the last hole that you went through. This isn't a structural seam, so and you can actually see my thread's doing something weird there. You might actually see a thread snap. It's not a structural seam, so as long as you get it back in some kind of shape, you'll be okay. This thing is doing something funky, but it looks like it's okay. So that is how you do it, and you just do that all the way around. It took me less than an hour to do the first one. I expect it to take a little less than an hour this time too, because I've done one already. But I'll finish this up, and then I will take just a video, I guess, showing the finished product. I think you guys will be surprised. It comes out pretty good. Like I said, if you didn't have a sewing machine and if you have zero patience, maybe just buy some. But you'll see, it comes out pretty good. So here's what you can expect as a finished product if you do this and you take your time. I'm going to say this in advance. This is not perfect, as most of my little projects are. This one has flaws. However, I spent $6 on thread, the amount of material I used, which I actually purchased to do my headliner, you know, two pieces are pretty small. And I think it was 15 bucks a yard for the headliner material. So let's be extra, you know, overestimate on this and say I spent $15 on material. So I'm at 20 bucks for two T-top shades. They're the original shades to the car. Well, that came with the car. Um, and I can say I did it. So to me, it was worth it. So you can see that for the most part, um, you know, looks pretty good. Corners are all right. It's fairly straight. It's done. These parts here, fairly good. A couple little issues. You know, I could point out the flaws over here. I got a little antsy with the curve, and it made some short stitches. And over here, there was a little misfeed or something wacky happened with that sewing machine. But for the most part, nobody's ever going to notice that. This part of the shade is hidden. The edge is hidden when it's pretty much all the way around. I think the this part tucks up underneath your plastic trim of your T-top, and this part's hidden by the headliner. So who's ever going to see it? It's not coming off. It's not going anywhere. Looks just as good on the back as it does on the front. Actually, it looks a little better on the front, on the good side. But a couple things I want to mention: the thicker thread. If your sewing machine isn't made for heavy duty sewing, you'll have problems with it. I ended up having to kind of stop, pull out, clip off the excess, and then, you know, start over again because this thread would kind of chafe and do weird things. But and I'm also not saying that you can't do it with the motor, with the foot pedal. You most certainly can. In fact, I did a little of this straight doing that. Like I said, it just kind of gets out of control. This starts flopping around, and it makes a hell of a racket too. Bang, 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 because it's punching through that cardboard. And I have some, you know, hear that. The thing's noisy, so every time it punches down through that, it makes a heck of a racket. Another tip when you're sewing down along, man, I gotta point the phone. When you're sewing down along here, and you know, this material is like that thick, and this ends up being that thick. So don't be afraid to get something like this little I don't know, little roller thing here, and just kind of like tuck the fabric in as you're pulling it over. Shove it in there, and then when you get to these corners, you'll see how the nice and tight the corner lays down nice. As you're turning, don't be afraid to get this in there and kind of jam that in there, because it'll kind of want to bunch up and get caught in that foot. So don't be afraid to get in there and goof around. Like I said, if you screwed up this whole corner, you could strip the threads back to maybe like here and get a good straight start, and just start re-sewing. Hit a couple of your previous holes and rethread. All that's going to look like is a little heavier section. You know, again, who's going to notice that? No one's going to notice that. So when the rest of it's standard sewing, basic sewing procedure, when you get to the very end, you overlap. You know, the material overlaps. I go, you know, 2 or 3 stitches past. Hit the reverse button on your sewing machine and hold it down as you're turning the wheel, and go, you know, 2 or 3 threads past your little joint here. So this whole area here is like double threaded, once this way and then that way. So that's that. I've got 2 refurbished, ready to go sunshades that aren't going to sag for a while, I hope, and couple more little odds and ends to do on the headliner itself, and then my interior little revamp for now will be finished up. Thanks for watching.